I've seen about 1,000 videos on how to get ahead of 99% of other music producers, and mostly they're filled with bullshit. Someone telling you to wake up early, or you gotta exercise and meditate before you work. Oh, no. It's having a healthy routine that gets you there. To be honest, I'm even guilty of giving out some of those tips. But that's not what's gonna get you ahead of 99% of other producers. None of your favorite artists were waking up at 6 a.m. like that. They weren't doing a cold plunge to get started. When they were starting out, the beginning of their careers, I doubt that they had a meditation routine. So what did they do? The ones that get ahead of 99%, they do these two things. And while these two things are kind of obvious, they're very hard and very scary. Number one, they were contrarian, meaning they went against the grain. They kind of did the opposite of what everyone was doing at the time. And number two, they took risks, meaning they took a new approach. They might have broken the rules, and they didn't care about failing. When we say getting ahead of 99% of producers, that means you can't do what 99% of producers are doing. Looking up afterlife tutorials and afterlife samples and afterlife presets, that's not going to do anything for you in that way. Because the way that afterlife became afterlife was, number one, they were contrarian. They didn't sound like anyone was sounding in techno at the time. Techno was the old school drum code warehouse techno, and that dominated for 20 years. And number two, they took risks. They tried a new approach. So while techno has always been this dark, mysterious warehouse kind of vibe, Afterlife said, no, forget the dim lighting. Let's go bright, outside, Toolroom, daytime festival. It was euphoric, not dark. And now that's what people are trying to emulate, which goes against 1 and 2. I'm gonna now explain how you can do the same. If you don't know, I'm Justin. I run Cosmic Academy, an artist development school, and we've been around now for over 12 years. We've worked with and taught over 800 incredible music producers, and they get the best results. They sign to the biggest labels: Toolroom and Defected, Anjuna, Monstercat, Armada. They play the biggest festivals. We have 4 students playing EDC this year. We have 3 students playing Tomorrowland. They played all sorts of shows all over the world. And our students that have this level of success, they get it by doing those 2 things. They went against the grain. Number one, they were contrarian. And number 2, they were taking risks. Let's look at some huge examples to really see this in action. Skrillex is a great example. In 2010, the dance music world sounded like progressive house and trance. Armin van Buuren was consistently ranked the #1 DJ in the world. Everything was euphoric and bright and melodic. And then Skrillex comes out of nowhere and goes completely contrarian. That #1 thing. What's the opposite of making a euphoric trance record? Make a hard dubstep track. He did the opposite. And not only that, but he did it in number 2, a risky way. He didn't have some huge studio at the time. He famously made that first record, those first sounds, on broken KRKs. Everyone back then, they all said, oh, you have to have this great big studio with all this fancy equipment. And Skrillex, he had a laptop and some broken KRKs. He was really one of the first people that you looked at and said, this is a bedroom producer that's going huge. And then bam, it worked. That record went on to win Grammys, and it paved the way for this resurgence of that sound and this new genre. Let's look at the modern success of people like Chris Lake or John Summit. Whether you love them or you hate them, you have to give them some sort of respect. Today, when someone comes to me and they say, oh, I make tech house, I have to ask them, do you make like Chris Lake, John Summit tech house? Or do you make like old school Toolroom tech house? And they almost always laugh because they know what I mean. And those guys, they've absolutely exploded in the past few years. And look, I know Chris Lake's been around forever, but if you just look at the last few years and look at what they're doing, they're #1 going contrarian. They're going against the grain for what tech house is. Traditional tech house, the tech house music from back in the day, it's pretty serious to minimal. Sometimes it maybe would have a vocal, but it'd be like, drop the bass, or maybe some sort of vocal just talking about the club itself. And the parties were very much the same. They're just grooving and chilling. And then here comes guys like Chris Lake, John Summit, and they do the opposite. It's not minimal, it's maximal. normal. It's not serious, it's over the top. And their vocals aren't serious. You know, they're not vocals that are just talking about the club life. The vocals are funny and sometimes kind of stupid. And the tracks are a little bit heavier, and so are their parties. Which is number 2, they took risks and they broke the rules. Chris Lake and John Summit, these guys, they're playing the main stages of Ultra and Coachella this year. It's a big deal. Tech house on a main stage is almost unimaginable. But if you look at the crowd and look at what kind of party they're having, it looks way different than the crowds that would be in the tech house tents from back in the day. Those crowds today, it's wild, it's in your face. There's crowd surfing, fishers jumping everywhere. That's not what tech house was 10, 15 years ago. You know, this year, that's what's closing Ultra. I can jump to another example. I can look at one of our own students. Look at the success of our student Nostalgics. She took our program 6 years ago, and she's in the bass house world. But 6 years ago, when she joined up with us, bass house had kind of sounded the same. You know, it'd be some old hip-hop sample, probably a male rapper on it, and a house beat. And then she just, number 1, went contrarian, and number 2, she took risks. She completely switched it up. She put her vocal on it, and that had a hybrid of her singing and rapping. So again, she went contrarian, and she took big risks. She gets on the mic, she raps, she sings at her own shows. You know, there's a lot of house music producers, especially at that time, who would say, oh, you can't get on the mic. You know, you're a DJ, you gotta just concentrate on the mixing. She said, nope, I'm gonna get on the mic and I'm gonna jump around the stage. She just played the live stage at Ultra. She's playing Tomorrowland this summer. She's played EDC main stage. She's absolutely crushed it. By the way, if you want to be one of our students like Nostalgics, I'll leave a link to apply to our program below. We're always looking for great students to mentor. And by the way, this is all of music, not just dance music. Whether you love or hate Kanye West, he did the same thing. He went against the grain and was contrarian. And number 2, he took big risks and broke the rules. You know, if you go back 20 years, you looked at hip hop at that time, it was all the same kind of thing. And then here comes this guy who went to art school, fashion school, and he's wearing a polo popped and a pink collared shirt, and he's making College Dropout, and he's using vocals in a very, very different way, and he's sampling things in a very, very different way, and it did really well. Jump to a different genre, rock and roll, Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix quite literally took chords that went against music theory. If you're a guitar player, you know exactly what I'm talking about. No one sounded like Jimi Hendrix because he went contrarian and he broke the rules. And we can sit here and say the exact same thing about the Beatles, about Prince, about Queen, about Nirvana. So what should you do? Well, you gotta stop trying to sound like your favorite artists. That's already been done. You're going to sound like the 99% of other producers. If you want to stand out, you must go contrarian, and then you gotta take big risks with it. You know, it's scary. It's scary because you're doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing. It's also scary to take risks, to take big swings. That's really the only great way to get ahead. Playing it safe will never get you those huge hits, those huge stages, to those huge levels. There's no reward without the risk. And guess what? If you fail, no big deal. Do you have any idea how many artists before you have had to try so many times, so many records, so many rejections? And look, even if you are playing it safe, you're still gonna have to deal with the rejection. So in my opinion, if that's the case, then you might as well fucking go for it anyway. Now, if you want some tips on going for it, I'm gonna put another video up right here. Go watch that next. I'll see you in there.